On a Monday morning in May, a man cleared out his desk. He handed back his keys. He said goodbye to the staff. He drove home in silence and told his wife he had just been sacked. 5 days later, he lifted the most prestigious trophy in club football above his head in front of 80,000 people. But the real story of how that happened is far stranger than you think. His name was Jupp Heynckes. And what happened to him in the spring of 1998 is one of the most extraordinary sequences of events in the history of football management. To understand it, you need to understand what Real Madrid was in the 1990s. It was a club that had not won the European Cup since 1966, 32 years. For a club that considered itself the greatest in the world, that was not just a drought, it was a wound. Every president who came into power promised to end it. Every manager who failed to end it was removed. Heynckes arrived at Real Madrid in 1997. He was a methodical German coach, calm under pressure, respected by players. He had won league titles in Germany. He knew how to build a team. And in his first season, he did something no Real Madrid manager had done in 3 decades. He won the Champions League. The final was played on May 20th, 1998 in Amsterdam. Real Madrid faced Juventus, the reigning champions of Europe. The only goal of the match was scored by Predrag Mijatovic in the 66th minute. Final score, 1-0, Real Madrid, champions of Europe for the first time since 1966. The players celebrated on the pitch. Heynckes embraced his coaching staff. The president of Real Madrid, Lorenzo Sanz, came down to the pitch and lifted the trophy alongside the players. And then, 6 days later, Jupp Heynckes was told his contract would not be renewed. Let that settle in. He had just won the Champions League. The trophy was still being polished, the champagne had barely dried, and the club told him he was finished. The official reason given was that Real Madrid wanted a different direction. The incoming president had a different vision. There were reports of dressing room tensions. There were whispers about player power, about certain senior figures at the club who preferred a different manager. The sports psychologist and performance researcher Geir Jordet, who has spent years studying how elite athletes and coaches process failure and success in high-pressure environments, has written about what he calls the paradox of achievement. The moment of greatest success, he argues, is often also the moment of greatest vulnerability. Because once you have achieved the impossible, the people around you immediately begin to imagine someone else achieving something even greater. Heynckes had ended a 32-year wait. But in doing so, he had also raised the bar, and the people above him decided they needed someone who could clear it. His replacement was announced almost immediately. A young Dutchman named Guus Hiddink? No. A legendary figure with global fame? No. The new manager of Real Madrid would be Fabio Capello, brought back for a second spell after his first tenure had ended in controversy. Heynckes packed his things and went home to Germany. He had managed Real Madrid for 1 season. He had won the only title that mattered, and he had been dismissed anyway. In the years that followed, the football world occasionally reflected on what had happened to Jupp Heynckes. The journalist and football historian Jonathan Wilson, in his landmark study of football management and tactical evolution, described the Heynckes case as one of the clearest examples of what he called the consumption model of elite football. Clubs did not hire managers to build something, they hired them to deliver a result. And once the result was delivered, the manager became expendable. Not because they had failed, but because they had succeeded, and the club had already moved on to imagining the next success. There is something almost medieval about it. The knight completes the quest. The king takes the treasure. The knight is told his services are no longer required. What did Heynckes do? He returned to Germany. He managed Borussia Mönchengladbach. He had a spell at Schalke. He retired briefly. He came back. He managed Bayer Leverkusen. He retired again. He seemed in many ways like a man who had made peace with what had happened to him, who had accepted that football was brutal, that success offered no protection, and that the only thing you could control was your own conduct and your own standards. And then, in 2013, something happened that completed the story in a way that nobody could have scripted. Bayern Munich were in crisis. Their manager, Louis van Gaal, had left. His replacement, Jupp Heynckes, had taken over in 2011 and done the job brilliantly, winning the Bundesliga and reaching the Champions League final. But Bayern lost that final on penalties to Chelsea in their own stadium, and Heynckes had announced he would retire at the end of the season. His replacement, Pep Guardiola, was already announced. The plan was set. And then the 2012-13 season began. What Heynckes did in that final season at Bayern Munich has been described by the sports scientist and performance analyst Dr. Walter Di Salvo, who worked with elite clubs across Europe, as one of the most complete team performances in the modern history of the game. Bayern won the Bundesliga by an unprecedented margin. They won the DFB Pokal, and on May 25, 2013 in London, they faced Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League final, an all-German final at Wembley. Bayern won 2-1. Jupp Heynckes had won the treble, the most complete achievement in German football history, and in his post-match interview, someone asked him how he felt. He said he felt grateful, not vindicated, not triumphant, grateful for the players, for the staff, for the opportunity to do the work one more time. He retired after that, properly this time. He went to his farm in the countryside outside Cologne. He tended his garden. He walked his dogs. He stayed away from football for 4 years. And then, in October 2017, Bayern Munich called again. Carlo Ancelotti had been dismissed. The team was struggling. The season was in danger. Would Heynckes come back one more time as caretaker? He said yes. He was 72 years old. By the end of that season, Bayern Munich had won the Bundesliga again. Heynckes had won 4 league titles and 2 Champions Leagues across his career. He had been sacked after winning Europe's biggest prize. He had come back and won it again. He had retired and come back again. And every time football had tried to tell him the story was over, he had found another chapter. The researcher Carol Dweck, whose work on mindset and resilience has influenced coaches and athletes across every sport, argues that the defining characteristic of people who sustain excellence across a career is not talent. It is the ability to separate their sense of self-worth from any single outcome, whether that outcome is success or failure. Jupp Heynckes was sacked the week after winning the Champions League. He came back and won it again 15 years later. He was dismissed by a club he had just made champions of Europe. He never spoke publicly about bitterness. He never campaigned for recognition. He just kept working. On a Monday morning in May 1998, a man cleared out his desk at Real Madrid. 5 days earlier, he had lifted the Champions League trophy. The club had already moved on. Football had already forgotten. But the man himself had not finished. And that, in the end, is the only answer that matters.